Admiral Al stood on the bridge of the Eternal Judgment and watched the planet below. 442b was a small world, covered in green forests and blue oceans. The humans had built a colony there 5 years ago. They called it New Adelaide. 12,000 humans lived in that settlement, building homes and growing food and raising their young. The Dominion had decided that this colony would be destroyed. Al had served the Dominion for 30 cycles. She had commanded fleets in a dozen wars. She had brought fire to many worlds and watched many species bend to rule. This mission was simple. The humans were expanding too fast, pushing into space that the Dominion claimed as its own. A single strike against an undefended colony would send a message. It would teach the humans to fear it would make them stop. The mathematics were simple: 12,000 humans, no orbital defenses, no military ships nearby. The Eternal Judgment carried enough firepower to crack a moon in half. This would be quick. Admiral, her weapons officer said, all plasma charges are ready, awaiting your command. Al looked at the planet one more time. She thought about the humans down there going about their small lives, not knowing what was coming. She felt nothing. They were just numbers. They were just a message. Begin the bombardment, she said. The first plasma charges dropped from the ship and fell through the atmosphere. They left trails of fire across the morning sky, bright orange lines cutting through the blue. Al watched on the main display as the charges struck the ground around the settlement. Buildings exploded. Fires spread. The sound of the impacts reached the microphones on their surveillance drones, a deep rumbling that shook the earth. Direct hits on the eastern residential sector, the tactical officer reported. Significant damage to infrastructure, fires spreading across multiple blocks. Al nodded. Everything was going according to plan. She expected to see the humans running now, fleeing in panic like prey animals. She expected chaos and fear and death. That was what always happened when the Dominion struck. But something strange was happening on the surface. Magnify the central square, Al ordered. The display zoomed in on the heart of the colony. There was a large building there, made of white stone and glass. The humans used it as a school for their young. Hundreds of children had gathered there for their daily lessons when the bombardment began. Al expected to see the children running out of the building in fear. She expected to see adults fleeing in all directions. Instead, she saw the opposite. The adults were running toward the school. They were not fleeing from the fire. They were running into it. "What are they doing?" the tactical officer asked. His voice was confused. Al did not answer. She watched the display with growing interest. A human male sprinted across the burning square, flames licking at his clothing. He did not stop to put out the fire on his own body. He kept running until he reached a group of 3 small children who were crying in the open. He threw himself on top of them, covering their bodies with his own. Another impact struck nearby. Debris flew through the air. The male's back was torn open by shrapnel, but he did not move. He stayed on top of the children, holding them down, shielding them with his flesh. "Admiral," the weapons officer said slowly, "the humans are not evacuating." "I can see that." On another part of the display, a female human was carrying an infant in her arms. A wall was collapsing beside her, huge blocks of stone falling toward the ground. She had time to run. She had time to save herself. Instead, she turned her back to the wall and curled her body around the infant. The stones struck her spine and crushed her legs, but the infant was untouched. Everywhere Al looked, she saw the same thing. Adults were not running away from danger. They were running toward the children. They were throwing themselves on top of the young, wrapping their bodies around them, using their own flesh as shields against fire and debris and death. A second wave of plasma charges struck the colony. The explosions were massive, tearing through buildings and sending columns of fire into the sky. The surveillance drones captured everything in perfect detail. Al watched a group of humans huddle together in the ruins of a collapsed building. The adults had formed a circle around a dozen crying children. They were facing outward, their backs to the young, their arms spread wide. When the fire swept through, it burned them first. Lieutenant Commander I stepped forward. He had been monitoring the ground-level feeds, and his face was strange. Al had never seen that expression on one of her officers before. "Admiral," he said, "I am seeing something unusual in Sector 7. Al switched the display. In Sector 7, a building had collapsed completely. The rubble was still burning, smoke rising into the air. Emergency response should have been impossible in the middle of a bombardment, but the humans did not seem to understand this. Men and women were digging through the rubble with their bare hands. Their skin was burned. Their fingers were bloody and torn. They did not stop. They pulled at stones twice their size, screaming names, calling for children, refusing to give up. One male collapsed from his wounds, and another took his place immediately. "They are looking for survivors," I said quietly. "They are looking for the young." "Under active bombardment." "Yes, Admiral." Al watched a female human pull a small child from the rubble. The child was crying but alive. The female held the child to her chest and wept with joy, even as fire burned around her, even as the sky continued to fall. The bridge of the eternal judgment was silent. Every officer had stopped their work to watch the displays. No one spoke. No one moved. On the surface, the bombardment continued. Plasma charges struck again and again, turning the colony into a sea of fire and smoke. But the humans would not stop. They would not flee. They kept running toward the children, kept throwing themselves into danger, kept dying so that the young might live. One image burned itself into Al's memory. A male human was trapped under a collapsed beam, his legs crushed. He could not move. He could not escape. A fire was spreading toward him, getting closer with every second. But he was not screaming. He was not crying. He was reaching out with one arm, stretching as far as he could, holding the hand of a small girl who was crying nearby. "It's okay," he said to her. The drone's microphone picked up his words clearly. "It's okay, sweetheart, I've got you, I'm right here, I'm not going anywhere." The fire reached him. He did not let go of the girl's hand. He kept talking to her, kept telling her it was okay, kept comforting her even as his body burned. He did not scream once. Al realized that the weapons officer had stopped firing. The plasma charges had stopped falling. She turned to look at the young officer and saw that her hands were shaking. "Why did you stop?" Al asked. The weapons officer looked at her with wide eyes. I don't know, Admiral, I couldn't." Al should have ordered her to continue. The mission was not complete. The colony was not destroyed. There were still humans alive on the surface, but she found that she could not speak the words. She looked back at the display. The humans were still digging through the rubble, still carrying children to safety, still giving their lives for the young. A mother held her dying child in her arms and sang to him softly. A father used his own body to smother flames that were spreading toward a group of hiding children. An old woman, too weak to lift the debris, lay across a trapped girl to shield her from the heat. "What are these creatures?" someone whispered on the bridge. No one answered. There was no answer to give. Al had studied humans for many cycles. She had read their history, analyzed their wars, predicted their behavior. She thought she understood them. She thought they were just another species, driven by the same instincts and fears as all the others. She had been wrong. She had been so very wrong. The bombardment had stopped, but the humans did not know that. They kept digging, kept searching, kept dying for their young. And on the bridge of the eternal judgment, they watched in silence, trying to understand what they were seeing and failing completely. The smoke rose from New Adelaide in great black columns that could be seen from orbit. The bombardment had lasted only 11 minutes, but in those 11 minutes, the colony had been transformed into a wasteland of fire and rubble. Buildings that had stood for 5 years were now nothing but broken stones and ash. Streets that had been filled with life were now silent and empty. But not everywhere. Lieutenant Commander I had served the Dominion for 40 cycles. He had seen many things in his long career. He had watched species surrender and beg for mercy. He had watched others fight to the last soldier. He had seen courage and cowardice, heroism and despair. But he had never seen anything like what was happening on the surface of 442B. The humans were not surrendering. They were not begging for mercy. They were not even fighting, not in any way that I understood. They were simply refusing to stop. In the ruins of the central school, a group of adults had formed a chain. They passed children from hand to hand, moving them out of the danger zone into the areas that had not been hit as hard. Some of these adults were badly wounded. Some of them were bleeding from terrible injuries. They did not stop. They kept passing the children, kept moving them to safety, kept working until their bodies failed them. One male human collapsed in the middle of the chain. He had been burned across most of his body, his skin black and cracked. As he fell, he reached up and grabbed the child he had been holding, pulling her down with him, wrapping his arms around her to cushion her fall. Other adults rushed to help, taking the child from his arms, checking to make sure she was not hurt. The male did not get up again. He lay still on the ground, his dead eyes staring at the sky. But the child was safe. "I do not understand," I said softly. He was speaking to no one in particular. "I do not understand what I am seeing." Admiral Al stood beside him, watching the same feeds. Her face was blank, but her hands were clasped tightly behind her back. "They are protecting their young," she said. "But they are dying. They know they are dying. Why do they not flee? Why do they not save themselves?" Al did not answer. Perhaps she did not know the answer. Perhaps no could understand. The drone feeds showed a female human trapped under a massive piece of rubble. Her lower body was completely crushed. There was no way she could survive. Medical help was impossible in the middle of a disaster zone, and even if it were possible, her injuries were too severe. She had minutes to live at most. But she was not alone. A small child sat beside her, a male about 5 cycles old by human reckoning. He was crying, tears streaming down his face, his small hands clutching at the female's shirt. Her mother. This was his mother. The female was stroking his hair. Her hand was shaking with weakness, but she kept moving it gently over his head, smoothing his hair, touching his face. She was speaking to him in a soft voice that the drone's microphone barely picked up. "It's okay, baby," she said. "Mama's here, Mama's got you." "Mama, please get up," the child begged. "Please, Mama, you have to get up." "I can't, sweetheart, I'm sorry, I can't get up this time." Her voice cracked, but she forced a smile onto her face. "But it's okay. Help is coming. Someone will find you soon. Someone will take care of you." "I don't want someone else. I want you." The female's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let herself cry. She kept stroking his hair, kept smiling at him, kept her voice calm and steady. "I know, baby, I know. I want to stay with you too, more than anything. But I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that? Can you be brave?" "I'm scared, Mama." "I know you're scared. It's okay to be scared. But you're so strong, sweetheart. You're the strongest little boy I know. And I love you so much. I love you more than all the stars in the sky." On the bridge of the eternal judgment, I felt something he had never felt before. It was a strange sensation in his chest, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. He did not know what it was. He did not know why watching this was affecting him so strongly. The female human kept talking to her child, kept stroking his hair, kept telling him she loved him. Her voice grew weaker with every word. Her hand moved more slowly. But she did not stop. She stayed focused on her child, stayed present for him, gave him every moment she had left. "When you grow up," she whispered, "I want you to remember something. I want you to remember that you were loved. You were loved so much. And nothing can ever take that away. Nothing in the whole universe." Her hand stopped moving, her eyes closed, her body went still. The child shook her, crying, begging her to wake up, but she was gone. I turned away from the display. He could not watch anymore. Around him, other officers were doing the same. Some had their eyes closed. Some were staring at nothing. The tactical officer's hands were pressed against his face. "Why do they do this?" someone asked. The voice was barely a whisper. "Why do they sacrifice themselves like this? They must know it is hopeless. They must know they cannot save everyone. Why do they not accept the inevitable and preserve themselves?" Admiral Al spoke slowly, as if she was still trying to understand the words herself. "The fight to preserve their species. The fight to preserve their territory. Every species we have encountered fights for something abstract. For power, for resources, for survival as a collective." She paused. "The humans do not fight for their species. They fight for their children, each individual child, each single life." "That is inefficient," someone said. "Yes, it is." On the feeds, the humans were still working. They were still digging through rubble, still carrying children to safety, still giving their lives one by one. An old man had found a young girl trapped under a collapsed wall. He was too weak to move the debris. He had been trying for minutes, his frail body straining against stones that were far too heavy for him. Finally, he stopped trying to move the wall. Instead, he lay down beside the girl and wrapped his arms around her, shielding her from the smoke and heat. "I'll stay with you," he told her. "I'll stay with you until help comes. You won't be alone." Across the colony, the same scene played out again and again. Adults who could not save the children chose to stay with them instead. They chose to offer comfort instead of escape. They chose to die together rather than let a child die alone. They had come to teach the humans fear. Instead, they were learning something far more terrible. They were learning what love looked like. And it terrified them more than any weapon ever could. 3 days had passed since the bombardment of New Adelaide. The fires had been put out. The rubble had been searched. The dead had been counted. 2,312 adults had died in the attack. 47 children had been lost. The numbers told a story that no words could capture. The adults had given their lives so the children could live, and they had succeeded. Admiral Al stood before the High Council, her carapace dull with exhaustion. She had not slept since the attack. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the images from New Adelaide. The father burning alive to protect 3 children. The mother stroking her son's hair as she bled to death. The old man lying beside a trapped girl, holding her hand until the end. "Admiral Al," Counselor said, "you have been summoned to explain the results of your mission. The bombardment of the human colony was meant to demonstrate power. It was meant to send a message. What is the status of that message?" Al looked at the council. These were the most powerful beings in the Dominion, the leaders of an empire that spanned 100 systems. They sat in their high chairs, looking down at her with cold eyes, expecting a simple report. She did not know how to give them one. "The colony of New Adelaide has been severely damaged," she began. "Approximately 70% of the structures were destroyed or rendered uninhabitable. The human population suffered significant casualties." "Good," Counselor said. "Then the mission was a success." "No, Counselor, the mission was not a success." The chamber fell silent. Counselor's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Al activated a holographic display. The first image appeared, showing the moment when the bombardment began. Adults running toward the children, bodies covering small forms, flesh used as shields against fire and steel. "We attacked a civilian population," Al said. "We expected them to flee. We expected them to panic. We expected them to die quickly and completely. Instead, they did something else. They protected their young." "That is not unusual," another counselor said. "Many species protect their young." "Not like this." Al changed the image. The father burning alive, holding 3 children. This human male suffered fatal burns across his entire body. He was conscious for most of it. He did not let go of the children. He did not cry out. He held them until the fire consumed him. She changed the image again. The mother crushed under rubble. This female human had her lower body destroyed by falling debris. She lived for 7 minutes after the impact. She spent those 7 minutes comforting her child. She died telling him that she loved him. Another image. The old man beside the trapped girl. This male was elderly and weak. He could not move the debris that trapped this child. He chose to stay with her instead of saving himself. He held her hand until rescue workers arrived 2 hours later. He died of smoke inhalation shortly after. His last words were to tell the rescuers to take the child first. The council was silent. Al could see the confusion on their faces. They did not understand what they were seeing. They could not fit it into their models of how intelligent species behaved. 73 adults died in situations where they could have saved themselves, Al continued. They chose not to. They chose to use their bodies as shields. They chose to stay with dying children. They chose to dig through rubble with their bare hands while fires burned around them. She paused to let that sink in. The human reinforcement fleet arrived 18 hours ago. They brought medical ships, supply transports, emergency personnel. They have been working without rest since they arrived. The survivors have been gathered in emergency shelters. The wounded are being treated. The dead are being prepared for burial. And their military response, Counselor asked. Surely they must be preparing a counterattack. There has been no military response. They are not attacking us. They are not threatening us. They are taking care of their children. One of the younger counselors leaned forward. Then we have one. They are broken. They will not fight. Al shook her head slowly. No, counselor, we have not won. We have made a terrible mistake. She brought up one final image on the display. It showed a funeral ceremony taking place in the ruins of New Adelaide. Thousands of humans gathered together, holding each other, weeping together. At the center of the gathering, rows of simple coffins had been arranged. Adults and children stood beside them, saying goodbye to the dead. I have intercepted their communications, Al said. I have listened to what they are saying to each other. They are not talking about surrender. They are not talking about peace. They are making promises. What kind of promises? They are promising their children that this will never happen again. They are promising that whoever did this will be found. They are promising that the dead will not be forgotten. Al looked at the council with eyes that had seen too much. We wanted to teach the humans about power. We wanted to make them afraid. We wanted to show them what happens to those who challenge the Dominion. And we did teach them something. We taught them what they are willing to die for. She pointed at the image of the funeral, at the thousands of grieving humans holding their children close. Now they are going to teach us what they are willing to kill for. The chamber was completely silent. The counselors stared at the display, at the weeping humans, at the small coffins, at the children who had watched their parents die to protect them. And for the first time in living memory, the rulers of the Dominion felt something they had never felt before. Fear. Not fear of weapons, not fear of fleets, fear of something far more dangerous. Fear of a species that would walk through fire for their children. Fear of creatures who saw death as an acceptable price for love. Fear of beings who would remember this day forever and who would one day come looking for the ones who had caused it. Admiral Al turned off the display. The image faded, but the memory would never fade. Not for her, not for anyone who had watched. Counselors, she said quietly, we have awakened something, and I do not think it can be put back to sleep. She walked out of the chamber, leaving the council to their silence. Outside, the stars burned cold and bright in the void. Somewhere out there, across the vast darkness of space, humanity was grieving. They were burying their dead. They were holding their children. They were making promises. And promises, they would soon learn, were something humans always kept.